Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. You're joining us for the third session in our series, Making the Invisible Visible, Hope and Action Amidst Challenging Times. My name is Ellie Weisbaum, and I'm an assistant professor in the Buddhism, Psychology, and Mental Health program here at the University of Toronto. And I'm so grateful to be part of this series, part of the organizing team, and to have with us today Dr. Larry Ward, who I'll be introducing in a moment. Before we proceed, and I am so happy to see also in the chat already folks sharing about the lands they're calling in from or zooming in from. And I'd like to share for a moment the University of Toronto's land acknowledgement. As my students and I like to share, we acknowledge that this acknowledgement is a paragraph, and so it is also limited in what it can acknowledge. But we collectively each week start our class by reading this land acknowledgement and really taking that as an invitation to connect to the place that we're in, perhaps to notice a tree outside that's providing us with oxygen, to take a moment to think about the peoples and the history that has happened on this land in this place, and also to consider our relationship to our ancestors that are here, our land ancestors, our tree ancestors, the animals, plants, and minerals that make up the space. So I will offer this paragraph with the additional offering, just invitation for each one of us here to take that moment to connect to the place that we're in. And if you'd like to offer your own acknowledgement of your place and space today, please use the chat for that. We wish to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the home of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this is still the meeting place to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island. We are grateful to have the opportunity to work, practice, and play on this land. And I also want to thank again the constellation of humans and sponsors that have helped us come together today. So the New College Initiatives Fund has supported this. If you're not familiar with the New College programs, we'll be sharing a resources guide in the chat that you can download that shares about our program, also about the program that I teach in, and also our wonderful co-sponsors. I just want to thank the University School of the Environment, Faculty of Law, Oise Wellness, and also the Ottawa Academy for Mindfulness and Contemplative Studies. It's wonderful to have co-sponsors because we really see each of these sessions as this opportunity for dialogue and connection. So without further ado, I just want to orient all of you joining us today. We're going to begin with a talk in a moment, and then after that, we're going to have time for Q&A. So if something is coming up in your hearts, there will be a chance to ask it. I'll orient us at that time, but we have the Q&A box where you can send in a question, and we'll also be monitoring the chat. So without further ado, I want to introduce Dr. Larry Ward, a senior teacher in the tradition of Thich, Nhat, Hanh, and Plum Village. He brings 25 years of international experience in organizational change and local community renewal to his work as director of the Lotus Institute and as an advisor to the Executive Mind Leadership Institute at the Drucker School of Management. He holds a PhD in religious studies with an emphasis on Buddhism and the neuroscience of meditation. Personally, I'm so honored and grateful to have him here. Every time I hear Larry give a talk, there's so much rich information, but there's always like one or two things that really like stays with me that I take forward, I think, into my daily practice. So looking forward to diving in and hearing from you. So I will pass the floor over. A warm welcome from all of us. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Ellie, and thank all of you who are here at the moment. I'm in the land of Querétaro, Mexico, the birthplace of the Mexican Revolution. I'm here at this moment for some medical activities. But I want to begin with a poem for you. I am the earth, even when I wake up crying. These are the earth's tears. Even the ocean of suffering belongs to her. I am the earth speaking to you now, and you are the earth listening with your precious ears. I am the earth walking through my doubts, my fears, my sadness, my loneliness, my joy, my suffering, but I am also the rain falling and the birds singing with joy that bless the world day and night. I am getting washed all over by my tears and my hope as the rain continues to fall. I am celebrating the miracle of every earth breath, every earth sigh, every earth smile, every earth hug, every earth touch of kindness that bring me home. I am the earth, and so are you. I travel with 4 photos I'll share briefly with you. This is of my mother, Viola Paris, who adopted me when I was 8 months old after being abandoned on the streets of Cleveland, Ohio. She's been my teacher of compassion. She taught me it's possible to love a stranger. The next photo I carry is of my beloved teacher, Thich Hanh, who just passed away. And I carry this picture because for me, he has been a resource of strength in understanding how peace does not have to escape suffering, that we can face suffering in the midst of this world and at the same time dwell deeply in peace. This is my favorite archetype from the Buddhist tradition. This is it's from a temple in Vietnam, but it's a picture of what's known by different names, the goddess of compassion, in Sanskrit, Avalokiteshvara. She's standing on the head of a dragon, which in the East means on the head of wisdom. And she's standing there amidst waves of birth and death. She's holding a willow branch in her hand, which is an ancient symbol in China for healing. And she has a vase in which she collects the tears of the suffering of the world and transforms those tears into the nectar of loving kindness and compassion. She's my aspiration for who I want to be when I grow up. My last picture is of Lucy, and I carry this picture of Lucy to remind me that evolution is not over. It is not linear. It is simultaneous. It has never stopped. We are evolving now in a million ways that we are unconscious of mostly. So I keep her close so I am not confused. I want to take a deep dive into what some people refer to as our moment of apocalypse. It is so overwhelming to see collapse, destruction, injustice being ignored, natural disasters, imbalances, and social chaos that are alive in our world at this very moment. But I've come through my practice to realize in the last few years, what is actually occurring is not what we see, or at least not what we see at first. Apocalypse, the ancient definition, has to do with the word reveal. We kind of turned it into a disaster thriller movie language, but apocalypse simply means light is shining on something that's been in the dark. Light is shining on something that has been hidden. And are we not facing every moment, every day, new information about what's been hidden? As we more and more learn of the consequences of what we call the modern world. And if you look deeper at the chaos we see, let's just take Ukraine, or let's take the Congo, or let's take Yemen, or let's take London, or let's take Hong Kong. I'm in Mexico, so we can take anywhere in Latin America. Let's take Peru. And we see a response of human beings planet-wide that we've never seen before. I think part of our problem for not being able to see completely what's happening in this moment is we've been conditioned to see everything as separate. Someone was mentioning that just before we began to go live. We have been conditioned in the Newtonian understanding of the universe where everything is a separate particle and does not affect anything else. And so we've been conditioned to think that way. We've designed our societies that way. And when this is the mind state we live in fear. We live afraid in day and night. But at the same time, there's a dawning on many people, that the illusion we've had for 200,000 years as a human species, that we are the center of everything, is coming apart. The planet itself is teaching us this. It's sending messages to the water, through the hills, through the mountains, through the animals. Birds are adapting and relocating. So are trees, so are beavers. Butterflies are moving, changing shape, changing color. So are plants and vegetables. It seems like nature itself is already way ahead of our human delusion. They have recognized something is profound, is changing, and they are adapting to already deal with it. Sometimes I think of the human species as the story of the frog in the pot that doesn't know it's being cooked. And all of a sudden, I think now some of us are realizing we're in boiling water around this planet. It doesn't matter whether I agree with it or not, it's the case. So the language for what I think is becoming visible is called by philosophers anima mundi. And that means, to use the earlier Greek definition, a world soul. And what I mean by that is what's happening right now underneath all the chaos we see is a shift in human consciousness. Whether it's a planetary response to the injustice of George Floyd's murder, whether it's a planetary response to femicide that's going on around this planet that goes unaccounted for, whether it's the millions of children that are starving, whose faces we can now see, and whose voices we can now hear, and whose tears we can now witness. The world has never had the experience of planetary consciousness. Our history has been individual consciousness, family consciousness, tribal consciousness, regional consciousness, national consciousness, which we're still in that model of national consciousness, which is also falling apart. And it's falling apart not for bad reasons. It's falling apart because it's growing beyond itself. We now know that a cough in the stock market of Shanghai affects our lives wherever we live. In the Congo, people's food shortage has been increased by the Ukraine war. There is no such thing as local anymore in the way we used to think about it. Every event, every occasion is now a planetary one. Who would have thought millions of people would come out to support the transformation of racial injustice as a system, a way of being, like people did with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and so on. So we are in a world in which is emerging new sets of values, new ways of thinking about how to care for ourselves. I was thinking about the Great Resignation, as it's been called, the number of people in the US in particular who are leaving what has been their traditional jobs. And the first thing I have to say about that is, people in the US are lucky, many people in the US are lucky to be able to contemplate such a thing as getting a new job or moving when they want, or looking to live as they desire. But 85% of the world does not have that opportunity to even contemplate. But that part of the world is showing up in profound ways. The water protectors, forest protectors, land protectors, history protectors, justice protectors. I have a client in Bangkok, it's an international school that I consult with from time to time and advise. And I was contacted last year in the fall, right after the chaos in the US broke out around race, et cetera, which is not a new thing. And the head of the school called me and says, I'm having kids in my school, K through 12, are all becoming activists. What am I supposed to do? I had a 7-year-old call me about gender. I mean, we are so disconnected from what's alive right now in the hearts and minds of humans. We are deeply connected to the institutions we've created in the past 50 years and the past 500 years. And those institutions cannot sustain the consciousness we now carry. Our solutions cannot be created from old consciousness for the problems we now have. We can't even conceive of it. And so this anima mundi, this shift in consciousness, this is also a feeling of being connected to the natural world in a new way, to other people in a new way, however they appear, whatever language they speak. We're more and more realizing our own capacity for human empathy across boundaries. That's a profound shift in our evolution. Now, we began by building trust with our families in early evolution to do things. Then we expanded beyond our families to neighbors. And then, the economic model of colonialism and industrialization created a whole new pattern of how we cooperate with one another to get things done. But the core issue, and I've talked with several people who are the Great Resignation category, so to speak, their response to me was, this is killing me. Living like this is destroying my life. I do not even have time to take good care of myself. The number one thing I heard from many people, and this is a poll recently also, was that they were exhausted, burned out. And this is across age groups. There are many people who are your age, if you're a student or an early student in the 20s or 30s or 40s. I went back and got my PhD when I was 60, so don't worry. But people are reporting across the world in every generation exhaustion. I spent a lot of time before the pandemic teaching in Japan. And one of the things I noticed, two things I noticed in Japan, which I love to be with and teach in, is on the subways at night, on the trains at night, children coming from school, workers coming from work are asleep. They're all exhausted, just burnt to a crisp. And more people are real, this is not sustainable. So Ruby Gibson wrote a beautiful book called My Body, My Earth. She's a native teacher, and she was trying to help us understand that the patterns of the earth are also patterns of our body. That when the earth is out of balance, our bodies are out of balance. Because where are our bodies? Our bodies are on and a part of the earth. So the anima mundi, as I'm describing, is a kind of new vibration And I don't mean the old California take on vibration, but I don't not mean that either. I mean a sense, Einstein called it a cosmic sense of belonging, of being here. I saw a documentary of the loneliness crisis in Japan, and some interviews of people who block themselves in their apartment and don't come out. They order everything on the internet. They work from the internet. They order food. This gets delivered. And this was pre-pandemic. And so it's continued. And it's is a very deep topic of discussion. London also just started a bureau of loneliness in its own government. And I was listening to one young Japanese man who said, what I want is a society that wants me as I am, a society that cares for me, a society that respects me for more than my capacity to make money. So from his point of view, I have no motivation to participate in a society that harms me or will not acknowledge me or respect my precious life. This is a shift. And we have a hard time seeing these shifts in the world because back to the Newtonian paradigm, everything is an event. When we look at our news stations or read the newspapers, everything is an event. I can't believe how much media time has been spent on the Oscars in the United States, given the state of the United States and given the state of the world. We have become a society in which our attention is manipulated so well, we don't even know we're being manipulated. Misdirected from what is profound, from what is happening. I'm thinking of Yeats's old poem about what rough beast is slouching toward Bethlehem. I say it is a new sense of what it means to be a planetary society. We've never had that before. A never before experience for the human family and the earth family of being connected. I've had the good fortune of traveling and living and working around the world. I see this everywhere in villages that I've lived and worked in Africa and India, and other places as well, including here in Mexico. Our conversations about sustainability of the earth and our society, a new common sense is being born. So when I listen and read from that point of view, I ask myself, does this make any sense? It's not a complicated question. The answer might be complicated, but the intuitive sense, the feel of sanity, is what people are searching for. I heard someone recently said to me, what's happened to them over the last several years since they went to school and graduated, got a job, raised a family, which has been wonderful for them. They have lost any sense of heaven. Heaven has been replaced by the mall, by the latest product, the latest gadget. Now, we have technologies right now so far beyond our existing laws, we should all be afraid of that. There's a debate right now going on in the UN about whether we should have robot soldiers like drones. But people are rising up saying that doesn't make any sense. What kind of a world would that create? All of our fears are rising right now. Now, we have some basic fears as humans. They all, for me, have to do with extinction. The ending of things, the ending of our life, the ending of different roles and responsibilities, the endings as we go through different stages of our own development, education, and growth. And you were talking about this a little earlier. All of this brings grief with it. And I don't mean grief is bad. I simply mean we experience loss. And we cannot escape loss. So that I know when I learned I cannot escape loss, I spent time learning how to practice with loss so I don't lose myself. I can be with my loss. I can hold my loss in kindness and acknowledgement. I do not have to deny my human experience. And that's another way what the young man in Japan was saying. I feel like I live in a society that denies my experience. No, it's like telling somebody, and I was going to talk about, I had some background with police departments. I was going to talk about the thousands of rape kits that are not opened in police departments around the world. But now a light is shining on that used to be in the dark. Jonas Salk, who I'm kind of a student of, I had the pleasure last year to have a dinner with some of the people who were on his staff and around both the development of the polio vaccine and the creation of an organization they called Beyond War. So we're sitting at dinner and chatting about the organization and their vision. And they were all like, oh, we blew it. See, guys, you didn't blow it. You were just early. We didn't have enough mass consciousness to go beyond war. We still don't. But it's happening. It's emerging in different places around this planet. We are recognizing that fear and violence as a way of social existence is not sustainable in any kind of way. The protector class is rising: water protectors, land protectors, soil protectors, seed protectors, all around the planet. But because we think of things as events, we see them as events, or we see them as tangents, some weird thing going on at the fringe of society, we miss the trend. We miss the gathering force of consciousness that all these activities represent. Who knew when Greta sat in front of her school this would happen? This is what I'm trying to describe to you. We are connected in a psychic sense, in a primitive sense of being human, in the best sense of that word. First, we have to step out of our dream and support of seeing ourselves as separate. That's the basis of the fear that drives our societies. This is why billions and billions of dollars are even increased at this very moment for defense around the world. I've been in places where people are starving and they have military budgets that are astronomical. This does not make sense to me. We have imprisoned ourselves in a way of living that we don't know how to shut down. A friend told me a story of wanting to repair his driveway, and so he ordered some cement, and they dug up the old driveway, and the cement truck showed up and started pouring the cement in for the new driveway, but the truck wouldn't stop pouring cement. It filled up the driveway and it spilled over into the yard. I mean, this is kind of where we are. So we are living on a living planet, not a mind, not a machine, not a shop place to shop. We are living with billions of beings, visible and invisible, every moment that sustain our life. So for me, what I've been learning to do, especially since the pandemic began, is to practice with the elements of the world. And there's several different ways of practicing with the elemental dimension. Every culture, every religion, and every secular society had different ways of recognizing the life elements that we participate in. The first one is the earth itself. We are. My wife and I spent some time looking at a new documentary on sea life. That is, people who lived under the ocean for a while filmed it. It's just astounding what we don't know about where we live. And there are people going, well, let's go to another planet. Well, well, there's an old saying in Zen, wherever you go, there you are. So going to another planet will not solve our problem because we will take ourselves there. So we have work to do on ourselves on this planet right now. But breaking the dream and trance of separation is so hard. It is a challenge, and it doesn't mean you don't exist. It means you only exist in relationship to others, to the air, to the water, to the vegetable in the fields, to the bees who support our agriculture. That is part of why I practice. Secondly, we have deep work to do with elevating our nervous systems. I've been studying and working with trauma for the last maybe 10 years or so in particular. And I was at a presentation, University of California some years ago, and I was lucky to be with James Lawson, who is the minister Martin Luther King sent to India to meet with Gandhi to learn nonviolence methods. He was there. And we had a gathering of different religious traditions, Jewish, Protestant, Catholic, Hindu, with shaman, etc., indigenous. And the question was, what is justice in your tradition? And we all responded as best we could. And at the end, James was tearing up. He says, we're all saying basically the same thing. Why haven't we realized it? We've been saying thousands of years. And so I took that, I didn't know the answer. So I took that as a meditation for myself. And I realized after working and studying and practicing with trauma, this is because we are living with multiple levels of trauma. Multiple levels, multiple years. It's piled on top of trauma, piled on top of trauma, piled on top of trauma. And so our nervous systems are either, naturally so, in a state of hypervigilance, always watching, always on edge, at the border and window of fear, or our nervous system goes into a freeze where we find ourselves numb, disassociated from our own experience and the experience of the world, or we go into the fight mode. These are all natural responses of the human nervous system to threat, to stress, and to change. But we've not learned the skills yet for how to be with ourselves as a nervous system. Our nervous system is the fundamental way we experience life daily. And I worked and lived in places where the fragrance of trauma is thick, where genocide has occurred, war has occurred, murder, all kinds of horrors I'll not mention have occurred. And I've witnessed the human capacity to overcome this. That's remarkable about us, but we are so focused on what's not working that we're not putting enough energy into what's emerging. There's a kind of pattern in change, which you already know. There are early adapters, people are called people who, get the iPhone first, get the computer first, blah, blah, blah. And then there's late adapters who are people who wait to see what happened to the people who did it first. And that's where we are in the world right now. But there's a third kind of response to change, and that is never adapters. These are individuals whose minds get meaning by not changing. And our tendency is I used to consult with corporations, our tendency, as well as villages, but our tendency is to try to get people who don't want to adapt to change. No, don't spend your energy that way. Cognitive dissonance, you understand what that means. That means the more you share with people information about why they should change, it actually reinforces for them why they shouldn't. So spend your time supporting early adapters. Lead birds. It doesn't matter if they're right. It matters if they're going in the direction of wellness, justice, and harmony. And then nourish the late birds. Nourish those who are waiting to take the risk to change their mind about themselves and about what's possible for us on this planet. Now, I don't mean to discount people who are never adapters because their role is significant. The role of a never adapter is to help the rest of us understand why we're changing. So learning how to work with our own nervous system so we can rewire our nervous system so we're not automatically driven by fight, flight, or freeze. So when we are frozen, we know how to unfreeze. So when we want to run, we know how to respond to that impulse, to that neurochemical dynamic going on in our bodies. And when we want to fight, we know how to receive the energy of fire in our bodies and direct it toward healing, toward loving kindness, the warmth of loving kindness, the fire of care in action, where we live, where we work, and in our whole planet. Somehow everything I'm saying to you now, I'm learning. I'm also learning that we have to design experiences. This is particularly true if you're an educator, but also true if you're in business. In the recent report from the American Psychology Association, they reported it doesn't matter, I'm back to cognitive dissonance, because a lot of you wrote about agreeing and disagreeing with people, et cetera. And the American Psychological Association wrote recently after a study that it doesn't matter how much information some people have. What changes hearts and minds is experiences. Debate ends up being the sound of one hand clapping. It's not deep enough to transform anything. Because our tradition and conditioning around debate is defense or offense. That's just a military mind. That's a warrior's mind. Nothing wrong with being a warrior, but you have to know when and how, or you will hurt yourself and hurt others. So put some energy into creating processes and experiences where people can encounter their own wellness. The more work and training I did in trauma, I started to understand most human beings don't know what it's like to be well. They don't know what it feels like. And I'm only talking about the small percentage of us who have the luxury of having conversations like this. I'm not talking about people swimming and rowing and running and crawling for a new life across this planet. They don't have time for this conversation. But we do. And because I do, my calling is to use my life to make sure they have a chance to have this conversation. Or as a native indigenous teachers in North America taught me, that this next 7 generations to come is my responsibility. Is not just what Larry wants or Larry likes or Larry desires. It's all of those things in the context of someone's coming after me. And most of whom comes after us, we do not know. Just like most of whom came before us, we do not know. To report yesterday on the map of the genome, the human genome, we've never had so much information about our genetic existence. It's overwhelming. We have millions of ancestors, millions of relatives, and we don't know how to be with that. We've carved out and carved up so many different ways of understanding ourselves. We don't recognize who we are beyond our cognitive descriptions. We don't know that stardust runs through our veins. And once I know that about you. I'm talking about somatic experience, not simply a thought experience. You know, many things that are happening now around ecology, around race, around gender, people have been praying for, walking for, and dying for hundreds of years. But we never had enough mass consciousness to shift the energy of the system that has conditioned us. And every system conditions people. That's what systems do. I don't want to spend time critiquing the system because I can do that. But that will not help me transform it unless that's my intention. My intention is transformation and healing, not simply critique. My practices in my Buddhist life or my Christian heritage, meditation, contemplation, and prayer, for me are experiential practices. They're not intellectual practices. They're not ideological practices. They are practices meeting my encounter with life in the here and in the now. So I have focused my mindfulness practices recently. It began when I was in Oaxaca a couple of years ago before the pandemic started. We were in an Airbnb and I'm working on my last book, America's Racial Karma. And our Airbnb was in a neighborhood we didn't know ahead of time, but right behind our little house was a family of donkeys. And every morning, about 3:30 to 4 o'clock, they would start talking to one another. And I would wake up, and at first I was irritated, and then I started to listen. It was like amazing. And then the birds would chime in with the donkeys, and then the dogs would. And so all of a sudden I realized I am living in a living place, not just a building. Life is bountiful all around me. I spend every day spending time meeting wonder, touching the wonders of life. Silence in the morning, I go outside after I do my meditation before I get up. Out of bed, I go outside and I listen to the sounds of the world. At night, I do the same. I go outside before my evening meditation and I listen. And as I've been doing this, the thing that has struck me the most, the loudest sounds I hear at first are machines. Cars, trucks, trains, bulldozers. It doesn't matter where I am in the world. So our world is so machine-like. that we have confused our capacity to invent machines with our capacity to invent humanness. And that's our remarkable opportunity that we're in right now. People around this planet are making visible a new understanding of what it means to be human. And that has to do with our relationship with everything around us. The water, the air, our friends, our neighbors, our strangers, our businesses. The last thing I want to mention, where I think is the cutting edge of what we're dealing with in transformation of the planet and transformation of our societies, has to do with the care, feeding, and transformation of our collective unconscious. Our world primarily is being run at the archetypal level of awareness, which most of us are not conscious of. I remember, and this is part of, I'm trying to think of language that doesn't make this a fight. Researching other words for battle, for contest. What I mean here is our world is being dominated by male archetypes, male stories, male myths, male urges, male accomplishments, on and on, but it's male-centric. And that's part of our greatest dilemma. I said to my wife the other day, what do we do with men? All this energy, all this training, all this testosterone. What do we do with this energy? We see it in our young children. I won't go through the litany of events occurring in schools, the bullying, the violence, the sexual abuse in places that are supposed to be safe. This is all becoming revealed. And it's being revealed so we can step up and beyond it. It's not simply being revealed to condemn things, though condemnation is necessary. But we condemn things in order to repair things, in order to create something new. I saw a news report early this morning on the Pope's apology to the delegation of Native Americans, First Nations from Canada. And that's kind of, I appreciate the apology. I think it's absolutely necessary. My question is, what's next? How do we repair? And we keep wanting to repair our society from racism and sexism and homophobia and Islamophobia. We have so many phobias socially, it's unbelievable. But we keep wanting to repair things without giving anything up. Life does not work that way. But unless we repair our trauma inside of our own bodies and hearts and minds, unless we repair our institutions that are pervaded with a kind of cruelty and acceptability of such cruelty and disregard for human life, my practice had led me to another fear I discovered in myself. And it is the fear of immensity. It is the fear of the feeling I have when I feel really connected to everything. And it's like, I'm disappearing. Where am I going? Who am I? I am all of that. There is nothing to fear. I am all of that. All of that joy, all of that sorrow. But the work of transforming our archetypes is the cutting edge. We see around the world the conversation about how society is organized, autocrats, quote unquote, versus democracy. These are archetypes. The male archetype has to have a makeover. Yeah. My father was a great teacher indirectly of this, where I learned. So when we had a plumbing problem in our little house in Cleveland, Ohio, and he announced he was going to the basement to fix the plumbing, my mother looked at my sister and I and said, "Call the plumber." He doesn't know plumbing. He doesn't know how to fix that. You know, I grew up with a TV show called Father Knows Best, which I already knew wasn't correct. And so we put these projections on people and expectations on people. And human beings love to critique other people's performance. We just love it. It's always been true about our species. We love gossip, we love status, we love talking about people. But we've got to go deeper in our conversations into the soul of ourselves, into the depth of our own humanity. I learned this also about archetypes in a corporate work I've done. I was working with a human resource department, and I was asked to interview a director why he was having difficulty with his staff. And so I went back over things and I discovered that this person kept hiring his high school sweetheart. Anybody who applied for a job that reminded him of his high school sweetheart, he would hire, irregardless of qualification. And we kind of live in a world that is somewhere between that and we've just seen this. We see it every day. And I don't mean that all of us can't learn and can't know. I do mean that it's important to take our lives consciously, seriously, as we go through change, as we make actions toward change. Or we end up just repeating the archetype, which is always tendency in trauma. If you've been traumatized, you can see this in the world if you look at history or the news. My culture was traumatized, and so now I am now dominant, and so I traumatize who's left. If we do not heal our trauma, we pass it on. So one of the fragile aspects that we're breaking through, I think, in the world is this understanding that we've been conditioned. Nothing wrong with that. That happens. That's what society does. It conditions individuals. But more and more of us are waking up to that fact we've been conditioned and that we don't have to continue that conditioning. We don't have to continue the conditioning of sexism or racism or ageism. You know, we're climbing a hill. We're climbing several hills, but the one I want to talk about before I end is the hill of maturation. As a human species, as far as I can tell, we're pretty much in high school. Our language is high school centered. Our behavior is high school centered. Our relationships to other people, in group, out group, blah, 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 all kinds of not quite an adult yet. So I think there's an adult revolution coming. But I think the adult revolution is coming from people we have thought were not adults. I'm talking about people younger, way younger than me. So I listen to them, I study with them. I just don't teach. New adulthood, consciousness of the whole planet, consciousness of taking responsibility as something normal, not special. The last thing I want to share with you is that we all have impulses and seeds and conditioning aspects within ourselves of how we've been conditioned to be an individual, to be whatever gender or non-gender we are, our race, our nationalities. But I've lived and worked in so many places around the world. Little of that conditioning helped me. It ended up keeping me separate from the people I was living with and working with. It blocked me from learning, from appreciating the gifts of people who are not like me, who didn't come from where I came from, who didn't speak my language. I have learned so much. I continue to learn so much, and that's what keeps me hopeful. Our neuroplasticity, our capacity of our 10 million neurons in our brains can change and grow and adapt. And so we must work to do that within our own nervous systems, with our own body-mind. So what I've been doing is practicing with the elemental dimensions of the world: earth, air, fire, water, dark, light, and spirit. So there's many models of different elements you can practice with, but I practice with them because, to me, our issue is we are stuck in ideology. We are stuck in thought. We are disconnected from the primitive nature of being human, from the wow, oh my God, I'm alive on a living planet with other people and other beings and other species. We're living in a miracle, but our conditioning is to act like we're not, to forget we are. Blessedness in the very moment of our life. And from that perspective, what seems like chaos is chaos, but what is motivating that chaos? What is motivating people around the world to stand up for Ukraine? It is the sense of being together and the sense of the interpenetrating nature of reality. We are now slowly realizing if that continues, it will grow. If it does not grow, we will be safer, wiser. Jonas Salk said evolution in the next stage, which we're in now, is evolution not of the strongest, because that's never what he meant, but evolution of the wisest. And early Darwin's comments were about evolution of the fittest. By fittest, he meant the capacity to adapt. And we have translated that from a male paradigm into the capacity to dominate. That's not what it says. It is the capacity to change that makes life possible, because life is changing itself. Well, I probably said enough for now. Thank you for listening, but please take good care of yourself. You are one of a kind. So are all of us. How can we not embrace the wonder of that? And from this wonder, create the world for the next 7 generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those words. We've been, as a class in both my classes this semester, exploring the limitations of words. So I appreciate your sharing of words, your problematizing of the words as you go, but also what I could feel as you were sharing. So thank you for both what was said and not said. and some thanks coming in the chat also. We're going to shift now. We have a wonderful opportunity, and I appreciated that word also that really resonated in my body, that we have this opportunity to look at what it means to be human. I think as we were playing around with you and the other speakers for the series, what do we call this? You know, this idea of hope and action amidst challenging times. And I could hear that invitation for hope. What is next? What is beyond this? You know, that we critique, not to stop at critique, right? But to look deeply and see that. So I really appreciate that invitation. And I want to invite folks who are with us and also to, touch this sense of privilege we have to stop and have this conversation in our day. And also that we are here with over 130 folks who want to take that time. So for me, all of this is really meaningful in my week. I want to invite folks who might want to ask a question to drop it into the Q&A panel. You should have a button at the bottom of your Zoom that says Q&A. We've had a few come in already that I'll read out to get us started. And I also wanted to just share and ask, we have Sam, our wonderful student hire and support, to drop into the chat a PDF of resources we have. I just wanted to note for folks now, in case you have to leave at some point, that these resources are a collection both of our programs, our co-sponsors, also a link to the Lotus Institute from Dr. Larry Ward. And I want to give a little shout out. I hear a new book's in the work, but also a wonderful book to check out from Dr. Larry Ward, America's Racial Karma, An Invitation to Heal. So I just want to give some shout outs to some further resources. The Lotus Institute has wonderful opportunities for connection and further training. And I also want to thank the director of our Buddhism Psychology Mental Health program has put together an incredible resource called Wind Vein, looking and interviewing different practitioners in our tradition, lots of resources on Wind Vein for how to connect to ourselves, our world, care for our nervous system. So if we're hearing some, how do we practice? We'll drop this PDF into the chat now, and just a warm welcome to say we hope these dialogues, these sessions are this opportunity to connect, to think of what's next, to have a sense of belonging, and to know that we aren't alone in this work. So with that, I want to read out some of the questions and have some time to continue this conversation. So more coming in here. We'll start. I want to thank Wanda for a question and also a comment that I'll read out. Thank you, Larry. Could you give more details and specific practices to address the transforming healing of traumas, human body, earth, animals, cultures, so we can create planetary consciousness and collective awakening?
Sure. There's increasingly a great number of resources around trauma. Gabor Mate just had a huge series on the wisdom of trauma. So I'm familiar with him over his career from Vancouver. My training in trauma and resiliency was at the Trauma Resource Institute in Claremont, California. And they offer a wonderful training program for therapists and non-therapists, for teachers, et cetera, in 6 basic skills to help a person recognize, learn to read their own nervous system, learn to hear the messages from your own body, and learning how to respond and to create your own language for recognizing what your body's saying to you, and then learning how to work with your nervous system so that you can return to balance. So one more thing about trauma, is often simply understood as a psychological defect. And it was for a long time. Again, this is a little bit of a male overlay on how we interpret weakness. And trauma is not about weakness. If you have a body and a nervous system, you have experienced trauma. That means the dysregulation of your nervous system's balance. It doesn't mean you're weak, it means you're human. And we ignore this to our peril. We see it in the students that come in when I work with K through 12 students in different parts of the world. You can recognize the trauma in these little people. And what we are learning now, I'm just online with the Bangkok School, what we're learning now is without helping children learn the skills, which they can too, which is wonderful about what the Trauma Resource Institute teaches. It is also transferable to children, to young adults, to families. So my friend, founder Elaine, who's there, look her up. So if you put it in Trauma Resource Institute, there's a lot of resources there. They have courses and classes on an ongoing basis. Great resource. I also spend time studying with Irene Lyon, who's also in Vancouver, who does a lot of work on trauma and resiliency and nervous system and neuroplasticity kinds of things. The third resource that's been helpful for me is the work of Deb, D-E-B, Dana, D-A-N-A, on the vagus nerve. Understanding the vagus nerve, how it works, how it influences our traumatic responses and our traumatic healing. And she also has a great book written with practices and videos. So those have been my three primary resources, in addition to my own Buddhist practice on mindfulness of the body. So for me, all of these are connected with how aware am I that I'm here in this moment and what's happening to me and how I deal with what happens to me, because how I deal with what happens to me spills out into history. And one of the things I try to correct people when they comment on my book, America's Racial Karma, is to really understand everyone connected to that experience has been traumatized. Not just people who were enslaved, but the people who enslaved are also traumatized. We know this from research. Easily, Stanford University did an experiment, is very famous. You probably heard about it, where they divided people into groups, and one group became prisoners, jail guards, and another group became prisoners, and they had to shut it down in a week because the people who had taken on the role, the archetype of guards, started abusing people. So we are so easily moved. So it's very important to recognize, Thich Nhat Hanh likes to say, understand that you are a lioness and you are a lion. You just don't get moved any old way. Learn to be stable, learn to be solid, and without rejecting your experience. So 3 resources on trauma, I hope that helps. They're all wonderful. And I keep studying and I keep learning.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think that's a beautiful piece. How do we all keep studying and learning? How do we keep adapting? That, that heart of adaptation, within ourselves and around us. Sometimes I like to say the idea of neuroplasticity. If you say, I'm never going to change, that person's never going to change, science has proved you wrong. This is very hopeful.
And this, to make a comment about state of the world related to this is societies that tend to think of themselves as democratic are realizing democracy is a living thing. It has to be fed, it has to be nourished, it has to be cared for, it has to be thought about. It is not simply an institutional structure. It is a way of relating to one another. And so that takes vigilance. I learned this as an early meditator. When I decided I was going to take a break for a few weeks, I realized my wife said, could you go back to meditating? You're harder to live with. Try it. It's all experiential. I'm not trying to sell you an idea, because it's all about our human experience. So have the courage to have that experience of learning and growing.
That's beautiful. And it kind of feeds into 2 questions we've got here, and that invitation, that there is I don't know if it's good news or bad news. We don't have, after watching this webinar, you won't have completely transformed and be healed forever. But there are things to do. And so the kind of two questions asking about, I think also playing off this theme we have, the individual and the system, our collective consciousness, our individual consciousness. So one question, I'll read the two, they intersect. Could you talk about immensity with respect to a feeling of overwhelm by the size of the challenges of transformation and not knowing what one person can do? And another question, how can I support groups or communities that are stuck in a critique phase to evolve into a healing rebuilding?
Okay. Great questions. One thing I've learned, and I'll start with, that I said also in the class, if I remember, is you can't change anybody. You can only change yourself. So when I realized that, it made my life much easier. So much easier. So if you want someone else to change yourself. And then they have to relate to a new you. That gives them an opportunity to change too. But that's up to them. So you cannot, we wish we could change other people, but the only way I know that happens is through their experience of me or someone else. I think the other thing to keep in mind is don't place all your attention on what's falling apart. Because one of the things I appreciate about my practice tradition is that, and it's not just practice, years ago, a guy named Jeremy Rifkin wrote a great book on entropy. Everything falls apart. Stars, planets, like that. Who are we not to fall apart? That is how the cosmos works. Things coming together, falling apart, swirling around. I spend part of my day every day studying the latest in astrology. So I keep looking outward as well as inward. And I'm able to recognize, my body's like the cosmos. Stars die and give birth to other stars at the same time. So our whole way of thinking about what it means to be human has to be grounded in the science of our existence, in our biology, in our physics. And not that those are perfect, but they're a good place to start rather than an ideology from some unhealthy person about what reality is and what reality can be. And that unhealthy person is always lurking inside of me, waiting for a chance to rub my ego, to make me feel good about how I am better than other people, or to make me feel bad about how I'm less than other people. That is the colonial model, people. The invention of racism and sexism is all about status. I had somebody ask me at an interview after my book on America's racial karma, and like, what is it? How do you feel about being a Black man in America? And I was like, well, you need to know I'm not just that. That's a category somebody invented. I am not just that. And so we have got to learn who we are deeply as a human being so that our lives, whatever identity we have, can be transparent to life itself. Can be whole in the midst of whatever suffering and change we're going through. I was walking through the jungle with Thich Nhat Hanh in Vietnam once, and we came upon, and others, many others, we came upon a group removing landmines. So it's like, how can I love the world when it's like this? Well, go ahead. No one's stopping you from loving the world. It is a mess. It has a tendency to be a mess. For me, the work is to take the mess and create. Imagine you're in a kitchen, a great cosmic kitchen, and the mess of our societies and history are all the ingredients we need to create something new in the kitchen of our lives. I'm learning to cook different kinds of meals as I've traveled around the world, and you work with what you've got, and some marvelous things occur. I'm learning to eat cactus, which is quite delicious. I'm learning to have corn soup, which the last time I was in China. I said, well, this is good. What didn't I know about this? I mean, our lives are like that. There are so many wonderful things about people and talents and cultures and gifts. We aren't even close to recognizing who and what we have capacities for. You know, there's 10 million neurons in our brains, some say, enough the same as the number of stars in the sky. We have a lot of possibility, people, but our attention, our conscious attention is how we direct that possibility. It is not by fighting with others who have a different opinion, because, you know, I can hardly agree with myself. So don't spend all your time worrying about what other people won't do, because you don't have any control over that. I had people write me several weeks ago when the war, quote unquote, happened in Ukraine about being afraid of nuclear disaster. Really? And that's possible, I know that. But when I had my third email about that, what I did is I took a break from the internet and I put on Bob Marley. That nothing can stop the time. So learn to live deep. Don't just understand that you are not just matter, but energy. I mean, scientifically, now this is all been very clear, but so many of us still only think of ourselves as a noun, not a process. And definitely not a process of the cosmos. We think we're a process of a job. We think we're a process of some geopolitical contraption. We're so much more. And if we come from that moreness, we can create the next form of society that will also eventually have to be redone too. This is how you keep from getting arrogant in social change. Is realizing if you live 1,000 years and you come back again, and there's still work to be done. There's still healing and transformation to be done. In the Buddhist tradition, I like to say the bodhisattva, the one who practices compassion and wisdom, always has job security on planet Earth. So don't worry too much. Your energy cannot be destroyed. Your unique imprint of existence, when you change how you are, you change the world. I know this because that's been my experience. Thich Nhat Hanh was a buffalo boy in Vietnam in a village. And the whole world came out in tribute to his life. So what happened? Kind of love grew from the buffalo, from the fields, from the family to encompass the whole world. So when we practice, the world changes because it has to deal with us differently. And when you understand yourself as energy, you can begin to see that. So understand, yes, this is very important for social activists. We think nothing has happened because we didn't see it. When in fact, most things happen and we don't see it. We see the results years later, months later, as Martin Luther King used to say. So train yourself in trauma and resiliency. Understand yourself to be free from whatever narrative that keeps you stuck. And know your narrative. Recognize your mind. That's where mindfulness is so important. Oh, I'm thinking that. Should I be thinking that? Will this help? So I'm learning to ask myself questions all the time about the state of my mind and my thought and my speech and my behavior. And I find it joyful because it means I'm alive. I'm participating in the process of living, not simply the process of remembering something, not simply the process of replicating something, but the living process of being present in the wonders of life in which creativity continues to flow. Thanks for those.
Thank you for those further reflections. And we had the joy of having Larry join our class a little while ago, and you shared that it really stayed with me. You know, I can only change myself like through my experience. That is what others meet. And I thought about this over breakfast a few days ago with my husband. I was thinking like, who am I right now? What am I? You know, I was like, oh, I want to tell him to do something different. I was like, wait, what happens if I just change me right now? Totally changed it. So thank you for being in class and helping me out at breakfast. And also just hearing, you know, this invitation from our tradition of engaged Buddhism, engaged mindfulness. Someone said, emptiness is a really difficult concept to get your head around. I was like, no, it's not. It's just that we're empty of a separate self and we're full of the cosmos. Right. But of course, simple, not easy to remember. You know, who am I? How do I relate to all this? What does that mean? So I so appreciate your invitation to explore that piece of ourselves and how we are part of this collective consciousness, this human family, and the entire cosmos.
Well, I think the key to being able to remember this is to understand this is somatic. This is body-centered practice. It is not intellectual accumulation. So my body knows joy, peace, suffering, compassion, care. And so as I practice, it has to be body-centered because that is what rewires my nervous system. So, you know, I won't go through a litany of the things I've been through. But you wouldn't want to go there, I will say that. And I had somebody come up to me and said, I want to be like you. I said, wait a minute. You need to know what my life was like. And so to use a popular phrase of Thich Nhat Hanh, to learn how to come home to ourselves. Right now in the United States, we are having a huge problem with being able to come home to our actual history. And I think it is so sad that people have no idea what they're doing to themselves by doing that. Just like whoever it is in different police forces that hide the rape kits, that put them on a shelf so they don't get research, has no idea the harm they're doing to their own soul by disregard of the suffering of others. No one escaped trauma. But we have people all over the world being traumatized at this very moment. And it's not just you have to be there. Watching other people get traumatized will traumatize you. Just like going to a movie and crying. What we see on our screens visually can activate fear, anger, running away from life in us. So it means to be careful of what you let into your mind and into your heart. Now, I have some people I've met over the years who I decided who were upset with me because I wouldn't be their friend. Well, they didn't understand the Larry boy that grew up on the streets of Cleveland for 8 months. So my primary motivation in life is not friendship. Once you understand my conditioning, my primary motivation in life is kindness. And friendship can happen. But I'm not trying to corral people or any of that. So learn how to be still. This is very hard for the modern human. Very, very difficult. Some of us can't even lay in a hammock without freaking out. And when this is true everywhere, not just here. We did a retreat with Thich Nhat some years ago on anger. It's a very popular book on anger in South Korea. And at the end of the first day, I had one of the Korean participants came up to me and he said, "I've been here one day and I'm still angry." And I said, "Well, that's good for you to know." Now let's start from there and let's go on through the rest of the retreat. You don't have to wrap it up. It's a journey. Many of the things I wish I could get rid of in my life, I discovered through my spiritual practice, they just fell away by themselves. I didn't have to do some big willpower trip. It just was no longer nourishing or helpful or didn't provide me with buoyancy or joy. And that's okay. That's quite all right.
Thank you. And I think as we come to the end of our session, that permission to not have to fix everything right away. With my students, I like to say sometimes we're just collecting data as good researchers. And, I want to honor we have more questions than we're going to get to, but also the questions have been asked. And as researchers, I say, we start with a good research question. Right. We still have to figure out the study design. We're going to analyze it. Like you said, someone later is going to problematize what we came up with. And so, just to say to folks as we wrap up the session, I love that permission. Also that permission to love the earth in its messiness, to love ourselves in our messiness, and this hope that change is possible. And so I want to thank you for those reminders and that real invitation to be looking without having to fix right away, but also what are we doing with our time? How does it help? To know that we have this privilege to have these dialogues. And so that also is a responsibility to question, what do we bring in the world? What do we leave here? So I ask all of these questions. I put out what's in my heart right now, to ask that question, what's next? To know that we have belonging, that we have a human family, a living planet we're on. So again, apologies if you came for the hour and a half webinar to have everything fixed and solved and changed, but we hope that we've asked some good questions. And Larry, I want to turn it over to you for any closing remarks. And also, again, just to really thank the community that's gathered here today, the support from the New College Initiative Fund to put this together, and to say we will keep iterating. We hope to continue the conversation. So we'll drop the resources guide into the chat again, and we hope to stay connected with all of you. So I thank you from my heart to Larry Ward, to our community, to the support from Francis and Sam in my program. And Larry, I'll turn it over to you for some final words.
Well, thank you, Ellie. It's been my joy to be with you again. What's coming up for me right now is a comment from Margaret Mead that small groups are the only thing that change the world. So this is not about size unless you're thinking of energy. But in terms of the matter of social action, I know from my experience in the civil rights movement directly, it was a small group, small group, small group, small group. I also know from my research that the idea of the final solution for Hitler came from a small group. small groups are powerful because they can create larger groups. And so I myself am only looking for how to practice with an island of sense of sanity, which I try to help Larry be sane every day, which takes some energy. And I'm learning it's okay to unravel and re-ravel. Last image. I lived in Taos, New Mexico a few years ago, and when we moved into our new little house, we got a rose bush. And after a while, I realized that the rose bush was blooming and deconstructing at the same time. This is what we have to learn to do. To bloom and deconstruct simultaneously. So it's not about let's wait till everything is, let's tear down all the old stuff, blah, 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 because the old stuff is here. We won't have any new stuff without the old stuff. And so learning how to create and let go. And letting go for me begins with letting things be. Then letting go, and then letting it flow. Have a great time with your life. And if enough of us start to have this sense of, oh, what a great time we can have here on this planet together. There's so much talent. It's just horrifying to me that we ignore most of it. So much heart, so much brilliance. With the children in Africa creating new inventions. I mean, we so miss everything because our media system is not where you should put your attention. Create your own media system. Create your own sources for information and news. It doesn't mean you ignore the mainstream, but you have to remember it's mainstream for a reason. Don't be seduced into living a conditional, compromised life. Be human, be wild, be deep. Thank you.
Thank you for those words, all these invitations. Again, we hope you have touched possibility for hope and action amidst challenging times. Thank you, Dr. Larry Ward, for your time, your presence, your energy, the words and all the things in between them. And with that, we will close this webinar, but we know we are boundless beyond space and time, so the conversation will continue. Thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you, Ellie. Thank you all.